Hello, everyone, and thank you for attending today's webinar, Ensuring Accessible and Compliant Healthcare Communications, presented by Fierce Healthcare and sponsored by Smart Comms. I'm John, and I'll be your host for today's webinar. Before we get started, here are a few quick housekeeping notes. If you'd like closed captions, click the button in the bottom right corner of the video player. Additional resources are available today in the handouts window. And to learn more about our speakers, check out the speaker bios window. If you close a window and you need to reopen it, just click its name in the top navigation bar on your browser. This webinar is being recorded and will be available on demand within 24 hours. And finally, time permitting, there will be a Q&A session at the end of the presentation. So if you have any questions for our speakers, please enter them into the Submit Questions window at any time. All right, now I'd like to introduce today's speakers. Jeff Ribkin is Research Director of Payer IT Strategies for IDC Health Insights, and John Zimmerer, Vice President of Healthcare at Smart Communications. All right, let's get started. Jeff, the floor is yours.
Good morning. This morning we're going to talk about ensuring accessible and compliant healthcare communications. What we're going to do really is get into the who and what about these, how to be compliant in these in this advanced regulatory environment. We're going to talk about the accessibility regulation and standards, what they are. We're going to talk about covered entities, what they are. We're going to talk about the accessibility requirements that have been mandated across the world. We're going to talk about the idea of vital written materials and what does that mean to you as people who are trying to comply and make your materials accessible to your population. Then we're going to give you some recommendations that have been written up in a report I wrote for IDC that will be available for you free of charge at the end of this presentation. And then John and I are going to have a discussion about SmartComm and how they can provide their solution to this fairly complicated situation that has been mandated upon the world. The regulations that are out there, again, it's an international situation. We've got regulations that are in Europe, Germany, UK, Australia, Singapore, and the United States. In the United States, we've got a situation where, sort of as an appendage to the Affordable Care Act of 2015, and over the last couple of years in 2022 and 2024, the CMS and HHS has defined that there's going to be non-discrimination in healthcare. And non-discrimination not only means race and color and national origin or sex or age, it also means disabilities. And it means for healthcare organizations called covered entities. And we will get there in a second. The standards that we are going to work with are really around and been documented by a couple of international standards bodies. The Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, which is hard to say, WCAG, and the PDF Universal Accessibility Guidelines. In the US, these regulations, like I said, were passed in 2024, and they'll be enforced in 2025 in July. And so payers are scrambling now to ensure that they are compliant, and also from a customer service perspective, making sure that they are being accessible and non-discriminatory to their members who do have some disabilities or other kinds of things. The standards that we're talking about, and this gets a little technical for a minute, but it's important because these are the measures by which you are going to be measured, is the first one is called the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, WCAG. And this is the Worldwide Web Consortium that's also known as W3C. And basically what it does is it gives advice to web content authors and says, or designers or developers or people building web pages and saying, look, regardless of whatever disability you have, whether it's visual or hearing or learning disabilities or age-related limitations, that you can convert a textual description into speech output or transmit it into refreshable Braille displays. So these are significant transformations that have to occur on most of your documents. Another interesting flavor of the WCAG is that they talk about a situation where the beneficiaries are situationally disabled. And that means that individuals, because of circumstances like they have slow broadband in browse or a browser that isn't necessarily what you would expect, or a slow connection speed. These kinds of barriers are considered situational disabilities. Something to think about. It may not be as obvious as some of the more physical things you would think about. The second standard is about PDF universal accessibility. We all know what PDF is. The standard of Acrobat to build readable documents out of lots of different content. The universal accessibility requirement is from ISO, the International Standards Organization. And what they do is they say, look, when you are reading documents, when you're asserting accessibility for documents, a lot of people have what they call assistive technology. And that assistive technology might be screen readers or magnifiers or joysticks to get around and understand documents, again, to overcome their disabilities. And this gets fairly complex, but what it really means is that, the same kind of facilities you get in a PDF document where you can search text or you can extract text to another with certain fonts, hyperlinks, those kind of things have to be done in an accessible way. The other interesting thing is you sort of have to put a header on all your documents to say what language it is and what its title is, sort of a metadata situation. And an interesting thing, which I didn't think about until I started researching this and wrote about it, is that there's a lot of security software out there that doesn't like when you start doing conversions and moving things around. And this standard, ISO standard, says now you can't have your security situation colliding with this transformation situation. And so when you're building these kind of conversions or integrations with this assistive technologies like joysticks and screen readers, you can't collide with whatever security protocols you have in place, which is, again, gets fairly technical, but it's important. So we talked about covered entities a minute ago, and we said that these regulations cover covered entities. Well, what's a covered entity, Jeff? A covered entity is pretty much most of the healthcare environment, the ecosystem. It includes hospitals and clinics and service organizations like post-acute facilities, long-term care facilities, ancillary service providers, also insurance companies. Any kind of organization that receives any kind of grant or loan or contract or subsidy from a government, including Medicare Part B reimbursement, is covered. What's not covered is an employer health plan, self-insurance plan, things like that. So there is a little relief for some of the payers who are in their self-insured world, but there's a significant amount of the world that obviously in the individual market and the small group market individual market, you should be able to do these things. So the facilities have to be enabled in your organization, regardless of your market share and where you go, unless you're 100%, supporting the self-insured in an ASO situation. I believe we have a poll. Is that true?
We do. And in fact, we're asking how many solutions are you using today to address accessibility? It's not common, but it is not unheard of that there is a single enterprise solution employed to manage accessibility across all of the different touch points that Jeff mentioned: web, print, large format, braille, etc. Multiple solutions is your second option. As you can imagine, that's where we think the majority of the industry is today, but the poll will tell us more truth than our assumptions. And then your third option is, I don't know. I have no idea how many solutions my organization may or may not be using to manage accessibility. Jeff, you do inquiries with payers predominantly, and I know that your recently published piece is going to generate some inquiries. What insights do you have around what you're hearing in those inquiries related to accessibility?
Well, there's a maturity curve with document management in general, right, or content management in general, and organizations go from one-off for everything to an enterprise approach. A lot of one-off for everything. A great example is in 2015-16 when the ACA said you had to come up with summaries of benefits and coverage, and basically it said put everything that you could talk about your products in one page in a readable format. And there's some products out there, some insurers out there with literally thousands of products that they sell. And so what a lot of organizations did is they built web pages per product. And so they built 1,000 web pages that said, okay, if you need to understand our products, go to these web pages. A one-off solution, didn't leverage, they had to go into policy documents, extract all this information, put it on one page in the format the government said. No concept of accessibility, no concept of brand management or jurisdiction or language or anything. Just sort of, we met the mandate. We put the information on one page out there for people to see. Check the box. We're done. What happened was that as organizations mature and realize this is not scalable, we can't continue to alter our products, every time in 6 different places in our policy documents and our screens and our reports and everything else that we have to file with the government and everything else. It just wasn't scalable. And so you're finding that those kind of nicely intended one-off check the box kind of situations sort of bite you. And so that's one of the reasons that this stuff, the idea of being accessible, might be an opportunity to re-engineer kind of the whole idea of content, both on screen and off screen. How are we doing here? Multiple solutions. This is, or I don't know. That's not that's and one enterprise and 5%. That's not surprising. No. Just document management or content management being collective and managed in an enterprise way is fairly rare because of how these requirements, whether they be mandated or not, have sort of crept up on organizations over the last literally 30, 40 years. Right, John?
100%. And what I would say to the folks who answered, I don't know, hopefully by the end of this webinar, you'll have enough information to be able to go to your enterprise architect or even your CIO and maybe the different product groups that Jeff mentioned, and give them a heads up that, hey, we have some accessibility guidelines that we have to meet. And the more solutions that you employ to meet those, the harder it is to address them consistently and coherently across all of the different products and across all of the different touch points.
And to survive an audit. So
100%. 100%.
So let's talk about what we're talking about here, the requirements around this. There's on-screen and off-screen. So there's screen, on your screens that you're looking at now, or off-screen. These are like reports, right? And letters and other communications that occur. This is both sides. So it's content management and web content management. The first thing is the idea of alt text. So think about if you're a visually impaired person and there's a picture on a document. The idea is that you have this thing called alt text, alternate text descriptions. And it says, we're going to have the meaning of the image conveyed to describe it, right? And have the visual content accessible. People that use screen readers can't access the content of a picture or an image. And so that's why that requirement is there, so that people can get the entire meaning of the document, even if it's an image. The second idea is the idea of read order guidance and tagging. And the idea is that when you're reading a document, sometimes there's columns or tables in it that, as a sighted person or a very sighted person, you can understand what the author was going for. But as a partially sighted person, you may not understand that, I should be reading this top down, left, right, or whatever. A logical reading order guideline that says we're going to allow assistive technology to understand the information conveyed in the document, because what you see on the screen is not always what the assisted technology is using. And so, again, you have to translate that, what you would think would be fairly intuitive, it's not. And so we call it proper reading order. and it's important to be able to and I talked about earlier, navigating, being able to use a search and other kinds of things that you would think of. And again, you have to be in the position and look at how people are seeing or not seeing this the way you do. Technology in place so they get the same experience that a fully sighted person does. Similarly, on the off-screen side, you've got Braille, translation into audio, establishing large format fonts, being able to be accessible by screen readers, all of this thing. And that includes, letters and communications and things like that. And we'll get to that in a second, what this idea of written materials are, because it is a large scope. If y'all are freaked out right now about how much this is, it's a lot. It's everything that you communicate pretty much about how you're dealing with the members who either have, well, let's talk about requirements next, I guess. Let's do it that way. The requirements include the idea of people with limited English proficiency, translating those documents, putting in taglines to ensure that the people understand that, hey, not only do we give you facilities on the screen, but you also have a reference to free language assistance services. So if you want to talk to somebody about what does this mean, there are language assistance services in the regulation that don't have anything to do with this technology, but they're important, that you have to be able to refer people to the appropriate help desk, if you would, to say, if you need help reading this, we can, in a certain language. And so that text is also buried in the documents, so you can make sure that you get the kind of service you need if your English is a limited proficiency. And there's a significant number of them, at least 15 different languages that are out there, and maybe more, that are being provided by this, depending on your region.
I think that's one of the biggest changes that we've seen in the definition of accessibility over the last several years, right? That expansion of the definition to include those folks who are not native speakers of your language, right? And in the US, we refer to limited English proficiency, but across the world, there are guidelines with respect to the languages that you have to support. And the way that you have to support those folks who are non-native speakers.
Yeah, so get used to the letters LEP, Limited English Proficiency. Put that in your, because you're going to need to understand what that means for a variety of reasons. Like we said, limited English, as well as disabilities, as well as those situational disabilities we talked about.
Yeah, and the way that LEP is calculated, I think people need to understand. It's the lesser of 1,000 people or 5% of the population that you serve.
Yeah.
It doesn't take a lot of people to trip over the LEP limit.
Put that in, LEP limit. There's something that you can take and run with. So again, if those taglines are for about 15 languages, but there's plenty more out there. So let's get to what we're talking about here. We're talking about what they call vital, in regulations, they have these wonderful buzzwords like vital written materials. And again, this is pretty much every functional area with health insurers. Advertising, the marketing of policies, how you enroll, cards, the pre-auth dialogue about getting a service pre-authorized by your insurance company before you execute it with your provider for certain fairly complicated procedures that need that kind of pre-authorization, claims, and of course appeals that go with those claims. All that stuff is in the scope of what's called vital written materials for these covered entities. So now we've all learned a bunch of different technologies, a bunch of syntax now, vital written materials. And when in doubt, I think you should assume that it's pretty well covered. This includes ANOCs, EOBs, notices, notifications, letters, pretty much anything that informs a member or a patient about the available benefits or services. It's a pretty large scope. And so, like I said, when in doubt, probably should consider it part of your requirements.
The shorthand is anything that is related to the access or payment when it comes to care, right? And so imagine the different materials that fall under those categories. Think about the different lines of business, right? In the US, the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services have a definition of marketing materials for the Medicare market, which is incredibly comprehensive. There are things that you wouldn't think of as a quote unquote marketing communication that fall under those regulated materials. Check on the CMS website and you'll see the entire list of regulated materials just for Medicare. And I would suggest that to make things easier for you, raise all of your efforts to the highest standard for each of the products, right? And in the US, as an example, the senior market tends to lead in terms of the requirements and even the number of regulations that apply to the senior market, because they're often seen as a vulnerable market segment themselves.
Yeah, if you're involved in Medicare Advantage at all, pay attention. To John's point, again, the vulnerable population is again perceived, and it's also it's real for people who have obvious disabilities, but in the senior population, and this is where this comes, because again, notice it's covered entities, so it's anybody who does Medicare Part B reimbursement, all those materials. Okay, and that's part of the scope of what these mandates address.
So you've got some recommendations to help people stay, within the lines.
Yeah. This is what we do at IDC, is come up with, not only present you the problem, but try to give you some help about how to solve it. The first thing I think is important is that, sort of alluded to this a little bit, make sure your solution can scale, and probably have it be in a SaaS environment so you can handle changing requirements fairly well. You can't call IT every time there's a new letter, or every time there's a new report, or every time there's web content that's changed, or you get a new brand, or anything. You can't. International companies have been dealing with brand and jurisdiction and language for a while. But if you haven't been, again, this could be chicken and egg, right? You can say, well, I've got my accessibility mandates out there that I have to meet, and really my brand and language and jurisdiction stuff, if I work in multiple regions, hasn't been working very well. Here's my opportunity to clean it all up and put it in one environment across the board. And again, that 4% of y'all that are doing the enterprise, kudos to you, congratulations. But on the ground, you can't call IT every time you need to change this kind of stuff, or use it, or build a new one. So the idea around a content factory, IDC, we come up with these nice, famous little pithy sayings. The idea that says, you got this content, whether it be on the web or whether it be written, you want to load it, curate it, store it, access it, and archive it in the same way. Have it be in a sort of a factory. It doesn't matter what you want to do. This is how you do it. And it's becoming more popular. Again, maybe gives you an opportunity to do a complete rethink. For those of you who have been involved in a merger and acquisition, how long did it take to rebrand all your stuff? Okay, just as a minor indication of what kind of pain you might be involved with. Another part of this, and I'm going to take my time going through these things because and again, the reports cover a lot of this that have been appended to your presentation. You can get to it. The idea of a dynamic template. The idea that you've got reusable components, that you've sort of separated the content from the template of the content. So you have a template of a document or of content of some kind, and then you could put layouts on top of it. It's sort of like a meta, component-driven template, and you could put layouts and bring in data, bring in different languages, bring in accessibility situations that are standard across all documents. And more importantly, you could do change management and versioning, which can prove for an audit that as of these days, I did have this stuff available and accessible. So when you get audited, and you probably will, you can show that not only do I do it now, but I have been doing it, and I can prove that I did it, and this is what it looked like then, and this is what it looks like now. And so the idea of separating the content from the template, or separating the metadata from the content, is huge. Instead of just building a letter, you go through this factory, you build a template, you put parameters on it, it generates a letter in a dynamic way, or the content in a dynamic way. It's huge. The other idea around this is to ensure that your PDF communications are accessible by a screen reader. Again, these are separate pieces of hardware and software that allow the limited sighted people or to be able to digest what you're sending out. A lot of times that's through another set of hardware or software. So you have to be exporting that XML format into another third-party solution that allows that translation into like Braille. Okay, that isn't intuitive in your PC, right? You have to be able to translate that and print it off in Braille or large print. So things like this. So, and again, the idea of having it be an integrated piece of data of software that allows export to these other devices and software. Another cool thing is to think about is the idea of pre-production and post-production. I mean, it's pretty easy to say, well, okay, every time I build a new one, I'll use my data factory and I'll separate my template from my content and I'll use my parameters and everything will be fine. Well, you got a bunch of other stuff out there that you already built and you got to convert it. And so you have to be able to post-production, you've already built the thing, post-production, you've got to be able to generate and do what you need to do after the thing has already been built. So pre-production is for the new stuff and in the process of the content factory, and post-production is sort of, okay, I've got this stuff, I need to make it accessible that even though it already exists. So it's a conversion effort, right? And again, there is grace on how long it takes to convert things. And I think the mandates, with all mandates, really you sort of in a lot of ways have to show that you have good intent and you're moving along towards it. No one's saying you have to convert all your documents by July 2025. Do you have things in place? Are you doing it? Have you done it? Are you working on it? That pretty much is enough for the moment. Again, things tighten up as time goes by. John, you have some comments on this?
Yeah, I do. One of the things that folks in different parts of the world need to pay attention to when it comes to timelines. There are existing rules and proposed rules around the world looking to accelerate the turnaround time from when somebody actually requests one of these accessible communications or a translated communication. We used to have weeks. The trend is now moving towards days. And so if you rely entirely on post-production for things like language translation or to make your content accessible, you better talk to your providers about service level agreements. How quickly can you get it to them? How quickly can they turn it around to you? That's why we're starting to see a shift more towards the pre-production side, so that you're sort of accessible from the get-go rather than to have to effectively reverse engineer accessibility and language translations.
Yeah, it's a mountain to climb for sure. But again, if you're thinking of a content factory, that might give you the frame that you're looking for. Another thing to think about, and maybe it isn't so intuitive about what we've talked about so far, is the idea that you've got to get input from people. You've got to build forms that accept data in from somebody who necessarily may have a disability or impairment of something. You have to be able to grab their data. And how do you do that? Well, again, using images with alternate text, building a question sequence, guiding the member through their experience in a way that's very accessible. Look at the top right of the form and you'll fill that. No, you can't do that. So you have to be able to say, I want to be able to collect data in a way that is as simple. Again, what you see is not what you get. The idea is that you be able to generate data, collect data into a form, especially if that form is the front end to and can be built and used in maybe a low code situation. So let's say you have, software that does low code. And allows you to build these forms very quickly and allows you to, again, that's for structured data. A lot of times it's unstructured data and structured data put together to build sort of an instruction in the form. All of these things have empower people, and maybe, again, by maybe using alt text to describe the images of how it works, And then the idea of helper text. So let data validation, we have it in a lot of ways now. You sort of hover over a particular thing and might give you some helper text. Okay, and you can see that. Well, think about if you have a disability or impairment, you need to be able to handle helper text in a way that's facilitated towards the people who have those, that is more assistive to those kind of individuals.
Three forms that everybody should stop after this presentation and go take a look at, right? Application or enrollment forms, number one. Yep. If they can't understand or consume the form and fill it out, you'll never get them as a member, right? The second one that you should think about is filing a claim or a member submitted reimbursement request. Yep. You talk about complaint drivers, their ability to get paid back for the money that they've put out is going to drive calls to the call center and maybe complaints to the regulators. And then the third is the appeal forms. We don't love getting appeals or grievances, for that matter, from members, but they're there for a reason, right? We have to provide that avenue of input from those members. So if you do nothing else from the forms perspective, go take a look at those 3 forms and assess the accessibility and make sure that they're available in the required languages.
Excellent. And for those of you who are, a little more larger insurance companies or international insurance companies, you've been dealing with brands and regions and jurisdictions and language for a while. This is just another one of those, right? It's just another way to be able to package your documents in a way that handles it. If you haven't thought about this, or if your brand, this brand gets, these reports are under this brand or over here, and these reports for this brand go over here, or maybe you've got some Southeast, acquired health plans that you have they sort of serve themselves all by themselves. And again, you've got lots of different parameters about how you've been managing content, both written and on the web, for a long time. And again, these things sort of just grew and grew and grew as you acquired a company, or you merged, or you changed your name. Think about it like that. Add and geography and language situations. How do I handle this at scale? And you'll very quickly go to the point where you'll understand that I've got this situation that needs business rules, and I need to have a context that ensures that I can use templates and wrapping content and putting in conditional logic and storing it in a repository, and the idea, and to share content. All of these things that sort of take this simple report you thought was fairly easy to do. Now you've got to recognize that because of you sort of have to separate the content from the metadata, from the template, from the appearance, that kind of separation or decoupling of that document has now caused you to be in another category. And a flavor of it, like I said, how many of you all have had to change brand, or had to go in or had to appreciate a different language in your particular market segment? That's just a touch of what you're dealing here. But how you addressed it, if you addressed it one off, it's just not going to scale. So that's where we're John a little bit about SmartComp. John, how do we talk about vital written materials and digital experiences for SmartComp? How do Smart Communications? How do they help?
That's a very kind question. Thank you, Jeff. So Smart Communications is a company that has been around for a little over 20 years. We've been in the cloud since 2012. And we really help manage 2 sides of what we call conversations, right? We manage the collection of that data, as Jeff mentioned, and we were talking about the different forms that members might encounter. And then we manage the outbound communication, the regulated communications, correspondence, et cetera. And we do that through a platform that we call the Conversation Cloud. And there are several different products that are collected into that platform. The 2 that really bear on today's conversation are SmartComm. That's the customer communications management solution for creating and delivering personalized, interactive, omni-channel communications at scale. When I say scale, we have some customers that are generating millions to billions of communications in a day on SmartCom. And then the Smart IQ product is the other side of that coin. It's that enterprise forms automation platform. It's a low-code, no-code tool to transform static forms, or really any data collection process, internal or external, into intelligent, guided, response-based digital experiences. Let's start with Smart IQ. When it comes to accessibility and language support in Smart IQ, Smart IQ was actually born in Australia. We acquired a company called IntelliDocs a few years ago and rebranded that product as Smart IQ. And the Australians know this, the rest of the world may not. They've been really leaders in around the world in terms of accessibility. Very stringent regulations. It's really part of the culture in Australia. And so Smart IQ has accessibility built into it. It was really born with accessibility built into it. There are accessible components to the application itself, and accessibility about the output that it generates. There are ways to make content more consumable, more accessible. Smart IQ has the ability to provide instruction pages that can include video or PDF or embedded documents. Those can be accessible. We have the ability to add estimated time to completion, so that if folks are not physically able to sit for a very long period of time, they can pause and resume at their convenience. We definitely have input assistance in terms of the different helper text. We have the ability to provide overlays and watermarks and a bunch of different tools and techniques for providing hints as to the type of information and how it should be formatted when it's entered. By default, we prompt folks to add alt tags when it comes to any embedded image or media. We have robust error handling and validation handling when it comes to validating accessibility. Our theme builder allows you, Jeff mentioned several times, rebranding. We have effectively a canvas for branding the different elements of an experience, not just the logo, not just the color, not just the fonts, but the placement and the style that your brand exudes in the marketplace. All of that can be replicated using Theme Builder. But inside of Theme Builder, we also have guides for accessibility, things like contrast ratio, as an example. All of those are exposed in Theme Builder. We can also configure the tab order. Jeff mentioned the screen readers and giving the screen readers a heads up. That can be configured directly inside of Smart IQ. And we can focus that screen reader or through keyboard navigation directly on the questions on the form, rather than the controls or the helper text or the other ancillary elements. And then we definitely have alternatives to text inside of Smart IQ. It's not enough that we provide an accessible experience out of the box. And I say that because by default, what you generate through Smart IQ is accessible. However, we're dealing with human beings who have creative ideas in terms of what should be displayed and how it should be displayed. And we do give you the ability to wander off the trail, right? And so we provide our customers with an accessibility guide to make sure that they understand what the best practices for accessibility are and how to remain compliant. We can start you that way, but if you really try hard, you can make an inaccessible experience in Smart IQ. And that guide helps people to understand what they should or shouldn't do in terms of content and managing accessibility. Now let's talk about.
We all need help. How do y'all do languages?
That's another good question. So from a language support, we start in the default language. So whatever language is assigned to the Smart IQ application, that's the language that you'll be developing in. But we support multi-language experiences. And so there's a couple of different ways that the experiences can be presented. You can either rely upon the browser's expressed language. So everybody that has a web browser, whether you realize it or not, there is a default language that browser is picking up. Usually it's a system setting. Sometimes it's explicitly chosen in the browser. And if you don't want to rely on the person's browser, or you want to provide some additional flexibility, you can put toggles in the user interface to allow folks an explicit choice over the language that they're going to encounter in that experience. Everything in Smart IQ is string-based, which makes it super easy to replace labels, help text, question text, etc. And there are permissions on the tool that can restrict folks to just doing language translations. The easiest way to accomplish that is to export the base language project file, as we call it, and you can provide, it's basically a spreadsheet. You can provide that spreadsheet to an external or internal translator to be able to go through and translate each of those elements. And then it's just a matter of re-importing that language file, and voila, you have an experience that's identical across every single language that you need to support.
Now, so getting to the content in general, what about vital written materials? Have you attacked the mandate?
Yeah, so the majority of the vital written materials are going to be encountered or created through SmartComm. Now, there are some vital written materials that are forms or could be entirely web-based experiences. So you'll have a choice of what to develop in Smart IQ or what to generate out of SmartComm. But folks use SmartComm for a wide variety of communications. That summary of benefits and coverage that you mentioned, the EOB, explanation of benefits, or any billing materials often generated out of SmartComm, correspondence, including correspondence that needs an interactive element. So a human being needs to personalize or to direct the content that is included or not inside of a communication. And when it comes to accessibility in SmartComm, we're interested in, again, helping folks stay compliant. And we have an integrated accessibility checker inside of our content analysis tools. We're going through every single element to make sure that it is fully accessible. And I'll give you an example of something that folks don't often think about. And you hinted at this earlier, Jeff, tables, right? When we think of tables, we think of, columnar data and x-axis and y-axis and maybe different cells. But tables can be used in the design world for pretty basic stuff. So think about an address block. That's often created in a tool like SmartComm as a table for alignment purposes, for spacing purposes, et cetera, right? Well, when thinking about accessibility, tables have to be tagged as whether they're just there for presentation or whether the screen reader should treat it as a more traditional table with data elements that it needs to be able to navigate through. And so that's one of the checks that the accessibility checker does, is every single table, you have to tell the screen readers, what type of table is this? We have the ability to configure all of the PDF UA flags, if you will, in the output generation side, but we also have the tagging on the input side. Those are done through things like the document attribution settings for language and title. We have header management, we have the alt text support, etc. And from a language perspective, you can go down to the individual paragraph and specify the language. When it comes to multilingual communications, we have a feature called Additions. It gives you the ability through a single template to manage multiple language. Again, permission-based in terms of who can touch that content. You can limit translators to just having access to the text rather than the design document. We have a writing assistant that can do a first-pass translation into multiple languages. And then, of course, our partners provide translation services that are certified by human beings. And from an accessibility and language translation standpoint, we have a relationship map that shows you every single language that a given communication supports, right? And so this is a single view into a communication. We can see multiple languages there, but you can also take the reverse look and say, okay, show me all of the communications that have been translated into a specific language. You can export this file, and that's important because in the US, for example, payers need to now maintain a list of every single communication that's been translated and the languages in which it's been translated into. And again, it's not enough that the output is accessible. We want to make sure that the folks using our applications are supported fully as well. So we've gone through and we've done the voluntary VPAT assessments of both the Smart IQ and the SmartComm product, and we've made sure that for each release, we're addressing anything that comes out of the VPAT assessments that are flagged for remediation. We're in a number of different health organizations around the world. Once we get a customer, we tend to keep them, and we're recognized by organizations like IDC and others as a leader. The one thing I also wanted to call out, Jeff mentioned this earlier, security is built into the Conversation Cloud. We have a security and trust page that goes through all of the different certifications, not only that we've achieved, but that we also maintain. And as you're looking at solutions, I would advise you to inquire with your vendors, when did you achieve that certification and when was the last time you re-upped it? We tend to do SOC and HIPAA every 12 to 18 months. Not every vendor does that, right? That's just one example. And now I think it's time for us to open the floor to questions. We have a number of different questions. I'm going to swap my view here so that I can see everything that's come in. We have a company that's asking about support for Braille. So I'm going to answer that in two different ways. And then, Jeff, if you have anything you want to add. Braille is supported through XML output out of SmartComm and Smart IQ. You have the ability to generate a file specifically for the Braille readers and for Braille print. And then from an accessibility standpoint, our products are navigatable by folks who are using those Braille devices. Jeff, you have anything you want to add around Braille?
Yeah, I think we're, again, one of those things where you're finding a lot of one-off solutions to do that. And scaling that again, getting your departments together, getting the CTO or the enterprise architect to find all the different requirements around the organization to execute Braille in a consistent way, in a more efficient way, is tricky and has historically not been done. So it's nice to see an enterprise solution to that.
If I could jump in too, guys, if the audience members, if you have not submitted any questions yet, you can do so right now, and we'll continue on with the questions, guys. Has IDC published any reports on regulations related to accessibility and language translations?
Right. So I'm the payer analyst for IDC Health Insights, and been doing it for about 10 years. And we follow all the mandates. And I've written a report. There's one syndicator report, and there's also a briefing report that was sponsored by Smart Communications. And much of the information I went over today is in those reports. Like I said, you'll have access to that report for free as a follow-up to this webinar. And don't hesitate to wander into the IDC website to see what else I've been writing about for payers across the technology spectrum.
And by the way, that is in the handouts window for those watching right now in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. Do I need to purchase the entire Conversation Cloud? New question. Do I need to purchase the entire Conversation Cloud platform from Smart Communications, or could I just purchase either the digital experience or document generation solution?
Oh, good question. So the platform is, how do I say this? It can be purchased a la carte. So you can turn on solutions one at a time if you'd like, or you can buy the entire enchilada. What I would suggest you do is an assessment. And folks like Jeff are great at walking you through assessing those vital written communications and thinking about the digital experiences that you're providing, and see where you need to start. If you're looking to consolidate your customer communication management solutions, and I say solutions, plural, because just about every payer has 2, some as many as 12 or more.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
That's a very big trend that we've identified mutually. Jeff and I have witnessed the same thing from just a cost standpoint, not just a complexity for managing things like accessibility. Folks are definitely on a consolidation bend. But yes, you can buy one or both. I would assess where your bigger challenges are and start there.
All right, thank you, John. Another question coming in. Do the Smart Communications products also handle delivering content and experiences, or do they just manage them?
So I think this is a question around presentation. When you say delivering, I think we're talking about the delivery tier. The answer is yes and no. So yes, from the Smart IQ side, we have the ability to host those digital data collection experiences. They can be embedded in things like member portals or even provider portals, patient portals, et cetera. We can either separately manage that. In other words, you're driving them to a site that is branded, Smart IQ, or maybe branded a little differently, or that we can do the entire embedded solution basically as an iframe inside of another server's delivered experience. No, from the Smart Com side. So we generate output that we know that it will be delivered through other delivery tiers. So the HTML that we generate, we're going to put somewhere where a web server application can grab it and display it. For the PDF UA output, same thing. We're going to generate that content and we're going to put it somewhere where it will be delivered either by a web server, or it'll be maybe even just output to print, braille, audio formats, all of the different formats that we support. We will generate the output and then allow another application to deliver it. That said, you'll hear more about this in the coming weeks and months. We're launching a new product called Smart Path that does do digital delivery of things like email and SMS. Hope that answered the question.
All right, once again, still time to submit questions if you do have any. Another question coming in, are you considering the VPAT, that's the Voluntary Product Accessibility Template, for evaluating or ensuring accessibility compliance?
Good question. So we have VPATs on both products, SmartIQ and SmartComm. VPATs are for software vendors are for the products themselves. There are ways to certify or verify the compliance of our output using some third-party tools. There are third-party screen readers. There are third-party WCAG assessment schemes, et cetera, for actually validating that the output is compliant. You can run our PDF UAs through Acrobat and validate those. And so VPATs are specifically for our products, SmartIQ and SmartComm. And again, you can validate the output is accessible.
I'll get another follow-up to that. Does the solution support the conversion of correspondence to desired grade level?
That is an excellent question. And so this person is very astute and adept when it comes to accessibility. The answer is yes. And so inside of SmartComm, there is the writing assistant and the content analysis tools. So the content analysis tools will tell you where your content is today in terms of grade level. You can either manually update, edit that content, or you can use our writing assistant, which is AI assisted, to be able to target a reading level as well.
All right, very good. Looks like that's all our questions. John, Jeff, do you guys have any final words for our audience today? Anything else you'd like to add or just reemphasize?
Jeff, anything?
Yeah, I think the idea is to assess your situation. This is if you haven't thought about any of this, and content management or communications management is not been centralized or considered for scale or efficiency or cost. This is a great motivator. Your organization will pay to do this. It is a mandate you have to meet. So you can take this excuse to use money, which sometimes, you probably maybe wanted to do in prior years, and say, look, we're going to get audited. We have to do this. It's a mandate by the government. And maybe then make this situation more attractive and centralized and efficient. And maybe you can show your organization how you can optimize your operations and efficiency and scalable, but you're also doing it in a situation where you're going to attack costs. And we all know that right now that costs and payers is a real tough thing. Yes, this will involve a bit of investment, but the content factory and the idea of doing this on an enterprise basis and the idea of taking all of those piece parts all around the organization with all of the web pages and all of the content reports that you have to do for just enrollment, or not just enrollment, claims, appeals, is significant. Take it one bite at a time, but you now have an excuse to go to your organization, to your PMO or whoever it is that approves your monies and your priorities for projects and say, we've got to do this. Now, how you build that scope is up to you. And I would recommend that you build it as comprehensively as you can so you can go for, you may not have another bite of the apple next year or the year after when you don't have that driver as of a mandate to come get you.
100%.
Thanks for having me.
I'll just echo what Jeff said. This is really an opportunity to assess all of the tools in the enterprise architecture. Many of them were not designed with accessibility in mind or have limited support for it, particularly for the current mandates. So I would go through and enlist the help of your enterprise architects because they know where all of these solutions are or should, and do an evaluation, be very critical. We worked with one organization who had 5 different customer communication management tools. They decided to pare it down to one. We happened to be the one that they chose, but in consolidating, they're saving, the projection is 7 figures in 2 years. So in many cases, Jeff is right, use this mandate as an excuse to get the project started. But in many cases, the consolidation efforts themselves will pay for the effort.
Fantastic stuff. Thank you both for your time, and thank you for everyone who submitted a question. If we did not get to your question, don't worry. We'll do our best to follow up after today's webinar. And as a reminder, a recording of this session will be available on demand within 24 hours, and we look forward to seeing you next time. Thanks again, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you all.